What is the most embarrassing thing you were ever caught doing? Part 2. Embarrassment usually hits hardest in the late teenage years, and this was definitely my peak moment. I was 18 and I smoked. My parents did not officially know about it because I tried to keep it secret. In reality, unless they had absolutely no sense of smell, they probably knew. As the habit became more routine, I even started sneaking what I thought of as a crafty smoke in the downstairs toilet late at night, then tried to flush the cigarette end away to get rid of the evidence. The problem was that the cigarette end never actually flushed properly. It would just bob up and down in the toilet water until I buried it under enough toilet paper and finally managed to send it away. So yes, 18 years old and already a smoker. Not exactly impressive. But in my defense, this was the 1970s, and back then, a lot of people smoked because it was still considered cool. That summer, I was invited on a trip to Germany organized by our local city council. I had been doing a little work with a political organization, and they had apparently chosen a few people at random to fill the remaining spots on the trip. I had a good friend who worked as the bar manager in the function room at City Hall, and he had been on a few of these free trips before. So before I went, he gave me some advice on how to make the most of it. He told me to collect as many 5-pence coins as I could before leaving. According to him, they were exactly the same size as the German 1 mark coin, which was worth about 25 pence at the time. His plan was simple. Use the 5-pence coins in cigarette machines around restaurants and hotels, buy Marlboro cigarettes cheaply, bring them back, and then he would sell them over the bar. At the time, it worked out to something like a 150% profit. Naturally, I thought this sounded brilliant. I collected every 5-pence coin I could find, and I even went to the bank to ask for a few bags of them. In my 18-year-old mind, this was not a terrible idea. It was a clever business opportunity. Of course, there was the possible issue of customs on the way back, but I figured that with a coach full of dignitaries, nobody would be too suspicious. We arrived in Germany and were greeted by our hosts. They took us to a beer hall for a few drinks, and since our hotel rooms were not ready yet, we were then taken by coach to a restaurant for some food. As we entered the restaurant, I spotted a cigarette machine in the lobby. Perfect. I decided this was my chance to test the 5-pence coin trick and get my first batch of cheap cigarettes. The machine was an old wooden and metal contraption, which made it look like an easy target. I put in what should have been 3 Deutschmarks worth of coins using my 5-pence pieces, then pressed the button for Marlboro. Nothing happened. I pressed the button again. Still nothing. Then I pressed every other button, including the coin return. Still nothing. Since I was young, stupid, and out of sight of anyone important, I gave the machine an enormous kick. That did not release any cigarettes either. But it did attract the attention of a member of staff. I pointed at the machine and, using my best attempt at German gestures, tried to explain that the machine had taken my money and had not given me the cigarettes. The owner was called over. He had a key, opened the machine, and at first everything seemed fine. He graciously handed me a packet of Marlboro and apologized, explaining that the machine was old, sometimes broke down, and would soon be replaced. For one brief moment, I thought I had gotten away with it. Then he looked into the coin mechanism. That was when he found my 3 5-pence coins jammed inside. His friendly attitude vanished instantly. He completely lost his temper. He snatched the packet of cigarettes back, dug the coins out of the mechanism, spat on them, and threw them onto the floor. Then he grabbed me by the shirt collar and belt, marched me straight through the dining room in front of everyone, and threw me out through the front door onto the street. At that point, I decided the smartest thing to do was go back to the coach and wait for the rest of the group to finish eating. Nothing much happened after that. Just a deep, bone-crushing embarrassment that I think everyone felt on my behalf. Back in 1982, a girl I liked invited me to a professional wine tasting at the Marriott in Boston. This was not some casual joke event either. It was a real wine tasting, with serious people who actually knew what they were doing. I was a broke college student at the time, but I managed to scrape together the $15 entry fee. Then we drove to the hotel in my beat-up 1968 Dodge Charger, which announced our arrival with a cloud of black smoke. I had dressed in what I considered my best outfit: white pants, a maroon jacket, a blue shirt, and a tie. She wore her nicest dress. We thought we looked classy. Really, we were just young and clueless. After paying the entry fee, we walked into the hall. At the door, a waiter in a tuxedo handed each of us a crystal wine glass. The glass was for tasting the wines. I did not really drink, and everything I knew about wine came from watching James Bond movies, which meant I basically knew nothing at all. The room amazed me. All along the walls were tables, each one run by a different wine vendor. There were crates of wine at every station, sommeliers opening bottles, arranging glasses, and preparing tastings. Each stand had a crystal pitcher, and near every station was a discreet spit bucket. In the middle of the room was a huge table covered with fresh bread, rolls, and cheeses from all over the world. It was meant for tasters to cleanse their palates. To me, as a constantly hungry college student, it looked like heaven. The room was getting crowded fast. The first stations were already packed with people lining up to sample and score the wines. It was a white wine tasting competition, so there were all kinds of Pinots, Chardonnays, Moselles, and Rhine wines. The room smelled rich and fruity, with the scent of fresh bread and cheese mixing with the aroma of all the opened wine bottles. To avoid the crowd, we headed toward the bread and cheese table. And honestly, I was thrilled. A broke college student does not ignore free bread and cheese. I started making myself a cheese sandwich and quickly realized the food was much better than I expected. For a moment, I seriously considered forgetting the wine completely and just eating as much bread and cheese as possible. I even thought about stuffing some into my pockets when no one was watching. But instead, I moved toward the main wine tasting table, mostly because it was not crowded. What I did not realize was that this was where the most prestigious wine entry in the contest was being presented. At the podium stood a sommelier in a sharp French-style double-breasted suit. He stepped aside respectfully so I could examine the bottle. I looked at the complicated label like I understood something. I understood nothing. On the podium were clean glasses, several open bottles of wine, and in the center, a beautiful crystal pitcher filled halfway with what I assumed was white wine. The sommelier watched me respectfully. Trying to look sophisticated, I picked up the pitcher, poured some into my glass, held it up to the light, examined it, swirled it around, and prepared to taste it. That was when the sommelier stepped forward. In a deep, accented voice, he said, "Pardon me, sir, but you are about to taste the water we use to wash the glasses." In that instant, I wanted to disappear. I felt about 2 inches tall. Humiliation rushed through me so hard I could practically feel it boiling out through the seams of my cheap suit. The girl I was with started laughing hysterically. People nearby looked over with clear disapproval because this was supposed to be a serious event. But the sommelier remained perfectly professional. With a graceful little motion, he gave me a fresh glass with actual wine in it and invited me to taste it. His face did not change at all. I drank the whole thing. I did not spit. I just moved away from the podium, stiff with embarrassment, trying to pretend I still had some dignity left. After that, I decided there was only one thing to do. I made it my mission to get absolutely drunk. I visited every table. I tasted every wine. I did not spit out a single drop. I ate as much bread and cheese as I could, and yes, I stuffed some into my pockets too. At that point, I no longer cared who saw me. Later that afternoon, I ended up outside in the parking lot, throwing everything back up. Then, with the girl passed out on my shoulder, I somehow drove 40 miles home while completely drunk out of my mind. The next day, she told every single one of my friends the story. After that, every time one of them saw me, they would repeat the sommelier's line. "Pardon me, sir, but you are about to taste the water we use to wash the glasses." I have never forgotten how embarrassed I felt that day. But I have also never stopped laughing at how stupid the whole situation was. Good times, good times. Most of my most embarrassing moments are things I do not actually remember. Other people told me about them later, usually after I had sobered up. Honestly, I prefer that kind of embarrassment. If I have no memory of what I did, it is much easier to laugh it off and turn it into a funny story instead of carrying around shame about it. One time, I was visiting my mom for a few days at her house. One night, a couple from her church stayed over because they had a flight the next morning and wanted to be closer to Lax. Apparently, at some point that night, I walked into their room completely naked, carrying deodorant on top of a record like it was a serving tray. I took the cap off the deodorant, placed the lid on their nightstand, cheerfully said, "Here's your side of ranch," then turned around and bounced right out of the room. I do not remember doing this. So in my mind, it never happened. High school, however, is a different story. Freshman year, I made the basketball team. The problem was that I knew absolutely nothing about basketball. I only tried out because I was pretending to be into the Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan. I was not actually into basketball. I was faking it because the popular kids seemed to like it, and I desperately wanted to be one of them. At that school, basically everyone who tried out made the team, so I made it too. But when I say I was bad, I mean I was truly bad. I had never played basketball, I had barely watched it. I had not thrown one, picked one up, dribbled one, or understood anything about the game. For some reason, I assumed basketball would be like recess, where you checked out one of those red handballs and played horse. I was very wrong. Basketballs did not behave the way I expected. They felt heavy, they did not bounce the way I thought they would, and the hoop seemed like it was somewhere in the sky. Then I found out basketball had positions, and those positions had names. There were plays, moves, rules, and an actual point system. The hardest part for me was realizing that even though I might have had some of the best grades in school, there were entire areas of life where I knew absolutely nothing. Sports were one of them. I had always felt a little superior to my classmates because I did better academically. But once we were on the basketball court, they had real skills, and I was still trying to figure out basic terminology, let alone how to dribble. Slowly, I started learning. Eventually, I was allowed to practice with the other girls. I could hit the backboard once in a while. I no longer had to pass the ball with an awkward double underhand lob from between my legs. Things were improving. I went to every practice, and on game days, I even got to wear the team jersey to school. Secretly, though, I dreaded game days. Actually, I dreaded drills. Honestly, I dreaded basketball in general. But my friends, especially the church-going homeschool crowd, thought I was amazing. So I kept pretending, fake it until you make it, right? Near the end of the season, we were playing a game where we were either far ahead or far behind. I do not remember which. Either way, the score was safe enough that my coach finally put me in. I immediately froze. To make it worse, the boys' varsity game had just finished, and they were sticking around to watch the rest of ours. I was terrified. Everything became a blur. Then somehow I caught the jump ball. Everyone started yelling. My coach was pointing and shouting something, but I could not process any of it. I just reacted on instinct. I took the ball, ran down the court, and made what felt like the perfect layup. For one brief, shining second, it felt glorious. Then I noticed the referee trying not to laugh while blowing his whistle like his life depended on it. His arms were flailing everywhere. My coach slammed her clipboard down and threw her hands up in a "that's it, I'm done" kind of way. Both the boys and girls teams were laughing hysterically. That was when I realized what I had done. I had run the entire length of the court in the wrong direction and scored a layup in the other team's basket. I am forever grateful this happened in the early 90s before camera phones existed. There were no videos, only jokes and little raps made in my honor. Out of all the embarrassing moments I actually remember, that one is probably the worst. At the time, my boyfriend and I were living in a house right next to the bar and restaurant that he owned with his sister. There was also an older gentleman renting a room in the same house. Over time, he and I became friends. He had a very hard time bathing or showering and almost never did, so eventually I started encouraging him to take care of himself, and I helped him when he needed it. I actually liked helping him out. Before long, we had a little routine. I would help groom him, shave him, trim his nails, and take care of small things like that. One day, I noticed his toenails badly needed attention. They looked like they had not been cut in years. They were long, thick, curling under, and there was a lot of buildup around them. It was honestly pretty rough. I told him I would help, but first he needed a proper bath. So I gave him a good bath and then got started on his feet. I was not expecting anyone to come into the house. After the bath, I began working on his toenails, but it was not going very well. They were extremely thick and difficult to cut. After about 20 minutes, I told him I would probably need to finish the rest the next day. By that point, I had already spent around 2 hours helping him bathe, getting him settled, cooking, and doing everything else. And this was not even my job. I was not being paid for it. I was doing it because it needed to be done. If he had wanted to, he had enough money to have someone handle it professionally. But I was there, and I cared enough to help. A couple of days later, I finally finished the job. Afterward, I had a random thought, maybe I should paint his toenails. Nobody would see it or know about it except the two of us, so I asked him. He did not hesitate at all. He said I could. That was the part I actually found funny and oddly enjoyable. There was something so amusing about this older man sitting there with painted toenails. Again, it was only supposed to be him and me in the house. My boyfriend was usually working long hours at the bar with his sister, and she almost never came into the house for anything. Her son did not usually come in either. But while I was sitting there painting the older man's toenails, My boyfriend, his sister, and her son suddenly walked into the house without warning. They saw us, stopped in their tracks, and immediately started laughing. I do not even remember what I said or how I reacted. I just remember feeling unbelievably embarrassed. I do not embarrass easily. Maybe it is because I have been around embarrassing situations so many times that they do not shock me much anymore. Some things have just started to feel normal to me. Other times, I am simply very careful not to get caught. The first embarrassing thing I can remember being caught doing was stimming. From my earliest memories, I would rock back and forth pretty aggressively. I did it in the car, on the couch, in my rocking chair, and honestly anywhere I felt comfortable enough to do it. I was almost obsessed with rocking. I did it constantly. As I got older, it started becoming a problem. My family found it embarrassing, and it was becoming less socially acceptable, so I began doing it only in private. When I was a teenager, I had a little corner of my bed set up just for it. It was almost like a tiny personal shrine for rocking. I had a large black pillow propped against the wall, and in front of it I kept a small boombox, because rocking always felt better when I had music playing. I also had a favorite pillow I liked to keep on my lap while I did it. It was honestly one of my favorite things to do, especially after an overstimulating day. But as a teenager, I was deeply embarrassed by it. Our house did not have central air, and during the summer it got very hot. It was even worse when I was stimming, because the constant motion made me heat up quickly. One night it was especially warm, so I opened my windows and pulled the blinds up to let some air move through the room. Then I started rocking and listening to music like usual. After a while, I kept hearing a noise. I stopped, turned off the music, and listened. That was when I realized the very good-looking neighbor boy from down the road was outside, peering into my window. My stomach dropped. I had no idea how long he had been standing there or how much he had seen. At that moment, it felt like one of the most embarrassing things that had ever happened to me. Luckily, when I told him I had just been exercising, he seemed to believe me. I was so focused on whether he had seen me stimming that it did not even occur to me to ask the much more obvious question: why was he outside my window in the first place? We had never even really spoken before. He explained that he had wanted to ask if I wanted to smoke weed with him. Then he asked if he could climb through my window. Looking back, that was an extremely strange and awkward situation. I told him I did not smoke weed. He said, "Oh, okay, can I still come in?" I told him my parents were still awake and that it was probably a bad idea. Shortly after that, he left. After that night, I made absolutely sure to close my blinds whenever I was rocking. 2 years ago, I was invited to one of my friend's birthday parties at her house. It was on a Sunday, and back when I was in class 11, I had chemistry tuition every Sunday from 10 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. So I went to the party straight after tuition, and I was already very tired. The main reason I went was to meet my best friends. I had not seen them in almost a year because after class 10, we had all changed schools. When I arrived, they were all sitting together and talking, and they were really happy to see me. Then my friend's older sister came over and said, "Have a seat. Do you want a glass of water?" I said, "No, it's okay, I don't need it right now, sister." She smiled and said, "Okay, then have fun." And then, immediately after that, I asked one of the most embarrassing questions I could have possibly asked. I looked at her and said, "Sister, do you have a toilet?" I have no idea why I said it like that. What I meant to ask was, "Where is the toilet?" But that is not what came out of my mouth. Everyone just stared at me like, seriously. Then they all started laughing, except my friend's older sister, who only smiled politely. My best friend immediately jumped in and said, "You are in someone's house and asking if they have a toilet. Obviously, they have a toilet." Of course, she never misses a single chance to tease me. I quickly started apologizing and said, sorry, that was my mistake. My brain is still full of organic chemistry reactions and I'm really tired. I didn't mean it that way." The birthday girl laughed and said, okay, fine, go that way, the toilet is over there." It was basically like walking into a hospital and asking the owner, "Do you have doctors?" This morning, my mother-in-law caught me completely naked. For the past few weeks, my wife and I had been clearing out the loft and garage, getting rid of rubbish and sorting through things we no longer needed. Since I was on holiday from work that week, I had been loading up the car every day and taking stuff to the council dump. We had also gathered about half a dozen boxes of things that were still useful but no longer needed by us. Books, old LP records, CDs, some unworn clothes, things like that. Instead of throwing them away, we decided to donate them to charity. That morning, before my wife left for work, she asked me to move the boxes from the garage into the kitchen so her mum could come by and collect them. I stayed in bed for a while after she left, scrolling through Facebook, eBay, Quora, and whatever else. Before I realized it, it was almost 10 a.m. So I jumped out of bed, completely naked, and went downstairs to the kitchen. I switched on the kettle, then headed into the garage to grab the boxes. Except once I got there, I got distracted. Instead of doing what I had gone there to do, I started looking through some things I planned to keep, especially some magazines. Then I remembered why I was there in the first place, grabbed one of the boxes, and started carrying it back toward the kitchen. As I came up the steps from the garage into the utility room, I looked up and saw my mother-in-law standing in the kitchen. She was watching me and laughing. I put the box down on the kitchen table and immediately apologized. Still laughing, she told me not to be silly and said I had made her day, because these days she only got to see naked men on television. I told her to give me a minute and I would run upstairs to put some clothes on. She said, "Oh, must you?" So I replied, "Well, if you don't want me to, you need to say so." Then she said she would actually very much like it if I stayed naked while she was there. So I said, "Okay, put the kettle on and I'll get the rest of the boxes." I went back down for the boxes, and each time I came back up the steps and through the utility room, she was there waiting for me with a smile on her face. Once all the boxes were moved, we had a cup of tea and chatted for a while. Then she asked if I was going to tell my wife about it. I said yes because we do not keep secrets, and I knew my wife would probably find it funny too. She already knows I am not especially bothered if someone sees me naked, as long as they are not offended by it. Then my mother-in-law asked if I would mind taking a photo with her while I was still naked. I told her I did not mind, as long as she was not planning to put them online or send them to her friends. So she took a couple of photos of us together, then a few more of me walking around the house. I would love to say I carried the boxes out to her car while still naked, but I did not. Her car was parked at the curb, and I was not about to give the neighbors a show. When she left, she gave me a longer hug than usual and joked that any time she was coming over, she would text me first so I would know to get undressed for her. Then she laughed and left. Now I just have to tell my wife.